As the Senate Committee on the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, tables its report of the 2010 Electoral Amendment Bill 2021 tomorrow, all Progressive Congress senators are set to delegitimize future elections and undermine the nation's democracy with their insistence on prohibiting electronic transmission of results. These attempts to tamper with the draft electoral laws have attracted the attention of the diplomatic community, which met last week with the leadership of the National Assembly, followed up with a private letter appealing to the lawmakers to do all within their powers to deepen democracy through the current efforts at amending the Electoral Act. This development followed an uproar generated by reports that was an attempt by the section of the National Assembly leadership to smuggle certain clauses into the draft electoral law banning the electronic transfer of election results, even though the same section agreed to an electronic voting system. According to our sister outfit, this day, it was gathered at the weekend that lawmakers who are opposed to the electronic transmission of results have not given up and are mobilizing to shoot down the clause at plenary. What is happening to Ndu?
I can't make head or tail of
anything. What is happening to a coup on our democracy?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I think the whole idea is quite transparent and it's completely disgusting. It's reprehensible. That's just how I feel about it. But I'm sure you have your take.
Well, you know, we took this subject about a week ago when it was revealed that after a joint committee on INEC, the Senate and the House of Reps had agreed on certain proposals with regard in particular to, deadlines, with regard to campaign finance, with regard to electronic transmission of results, that some persons met in a hotel and they tampered with it. And all of us had expressed outrage at how is this possible in Nigeria? This is an electoral amendment act bill that had been rejected about 3 times in the past by the presidency, particularly in 2018, on the grounds that certain phrasing, certain use of language was incorrect, and that it was even close to the election. And everybody had been saying, okay, this time around, we should make sure that that Electoral Act amendment bill is passed early enough so that we'll have the proper framework, the proper template for elections in 2023. Because the only way you can deepen the electoral system is to have a framework, that promotes democracy, not a framework that defeats the objective or objectives of integrity and the credibility of elections. So Nigerians were justifiably concerned, but the House of Representatives, the Speaker, and others came forward and said, well, look, this is not true until the thing is finalized by the Committee of the Whole. Nigerians cannot raise questions. But I recall interviewing Comrade Shehu Sani, who is going to be on this program later this morning. And he said, look, he had been a member of that National Assembly. Anything is possible in Nigeria of today. Yesterday, I interviewed the former House of Reps Speaker, Alhaji Gali Umar Nahaba. He too repeated the same phrase, that anything is possible in Nigeria. How are we suddenly running a country where anything is possible? And nobody is following the rules. Nobody is obeying the principle of common sense and decency and citizenship. Yes, it will appear that if the House of Reps, the National Assembly, goes ahead to pass a bill that, and the APC members wielding the superiority of their numbers, because we say in politics, numbers are important, and then they impose on Nigerians an electoral law, 2021, that will not allow transparency or credibility or integrity, then the matter will fall back to Nigerians to say, we don't want this law. It will fall back on civil society groups to say, no, the president must not assent to it. They've said nothing of such has happened, that people are speculating until you see the final thing. And we've been told that by July 13, that particular bill will come back to the National Assembly. So all of us are waiting for tomorrow. What the National Assembly or what the Committee of the Whole will decide. Will the Committee of the Whole tell Nigerians that electronic transmission of results is impossible, which is a gold standard that is adopted elsewhere? It was even experimented with in one state of the Federation. It worked. That state dropped it immediately. Because obviously in Nigeria, certain vested interests do not want transparency with regard to results. Even in the same National Assembly that we're calling upon, they don't do electronic voting. They do voice vote. And the voice vote can go, can vary according to the mood of the presiding officer. What Nigerians are asking for is simple. What they demanded during the public hearings is simple. They just want transparency. They want their votes to count. And if electronic voting will make it count, and if they will not go out behind and even manipulate that electronic voting process, they just want to say, okay, I voted. Can my vote just count? And I think it's not too much for Nigerians to decide upon. What we should be asking for, I guess, is that perhaps when a final decision is taken on this electoral amendment bill, maybe it should be televised. Maybe they should adopt for the first time electronic voting so that Nigerians can know which person, who they elected, who is working against their interests, who is supporting a coup against the Nigerian people.
Yes.
We cannot have a National Assembly that operates on the basis of the principles of a secret society. They have promised us an open secret ballot. But what Nigerians are asking for is simply transparency. And I think it's important that we continue to insist in this regard. So we'll see what happens when, what they are, whatever sorcery, because it looks like sorcery to me, that they are doing with the electoral amendment bill comes to the committee of the whole. But they should do it in the open so that all of us can see it. We'll know who are the enemies of the Nigerian people and who is committed to the progress, the strengthening, the deepening of the credibility and integrity of the electoral process. The bigger question, which you, Rufai, raised the other day, is that, look, we have to take a look at the independence of the Electoral Commission. And this was the recommendation of the Justice Uwais Commission. The Justice Uwais Commission had specific recommendations on how to make INEC in particular effective and independent. The third issue is about campaign finance. Nobody should need 15 billion naira to be president of Nigeria, or 5 billion naira to be, although I know that the foreign exchange now is ridiculous. In fact, the way we are going now, nobody will be able to go to England by the end of the year. We are now dependent on children who are in England, who are working in foreign countries, because the foreign exchange regime in Nigeria is upside down. There was a time exchange used to be 1-to-1 in this country. Now you can't even buy, people used to go to London and buy toothpaste with Naira. You can't go there now and buy toothpaste with Naira. Which teeth will you use to even use that toothpaste?
It's so sad. The country has been run right into the ground.
Yeah, it's very sad. And you see, when you see the magic that goes on in the National Assembly, sometimes you'll even shudder and think, can Professor Dumbledore really understand this level of magic? Yeah,
but then we're not going to. You're talking about voice votes, the ayes and the nays and what have you. What about the National Assembly budget? Opaque.
Tunde, don't go there.
So there's just so many issues that we have with the National Assembly.
Tunde, don't go there. That's another heartbreak. That's all on New Zealand. We'll take a short break. When we return, we'll have Rotus, Michael, Adesua, and Aaron to give us updates on Africa, global business, COVID-19, and sporting activities across the globe. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Our dependable Rotus Adiri is here to give us an African business update. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Tundu. Good morning to all our viewers. We kick things off with the oil and gas in Africa's petroleum industry bill. We're back there again. There's a clause apparently that the Senate
only to oil refiners. And if we actually take a look at, I think it's section 317 of that clause, it actually says, you should see 2 points there. It says the authority shall apply the backward integration policy in the downstream sector to encourage investment in local refining. Then point number 2 says that to support this, licensed to import any product shortfalls shall be assigned only to companies with active local refining license. And so it's going to be based on an allocation based on refining capacity. And if we look ahead and look at the capacity of the Dangote refinery, for instance, 650,000 barrels, he would, obviously get the largest allocation of that if this scales through. And then you've got smaller modular refineries, 15, 20,000 barrel per day capacities that would actually get lower allocation. The issue with this, though, which is causing analysts and sector players to kick against it, is that it contradicts Section 205 of the Petroleum Industry Bill. And Section 205 specifically says that wholesale and retail prices of petroleum products shall be based on unrestricted free market pricing conditions. So you're essentially tampering with supply by restricting the ability to import refined fuel only to the refineries. You can imagine that oil marketers are not going to like this at all. As of right now, of course, the NNPC is the only body that is importing. But if you think about what the PIB prescribes for the NNPC is supposed to become a functioning, profit-seeking company subject to corporate governance guidelines and so on and so forth. So whatever capacity the NNPC is in its later stages, it would theoretically also receive an allocation. But you're tampering with supply here, and essentially distorting the market by giving this undue advantage only to the refiners. The other side of this argument is that they'll say, look at least proponents of this, I imagine in the Senate that put this clause in, will say, look at cement and look at sugar as far as the backward integration policies that have been put there. Those, what's the price of cement right now? Last week on Friday specifically, or was it Thursday, we talked about the head of BOA Cement, Mr. Elijah Rabiu, who was saying that, look, we need more players in the cement sector in order to bring down prices, because cement prices are very high. The sugar part, there have been so many headlines with sugar between BOA flour mills and Dangote sugar. So there's a lot going on there, and we haven't quite seen, we're not at the finish line yet with that backward integration policy with sugar. So use that as a template for oil refining. As of right now, the players are going to kick against that because it's tampering with supply and giving undue advantage to players that only have refining capacity. There are other ways to boost investment in the downstream sector without having to resort to restricting access to importing refined fuel into the country. There's also the foreign exchange aspect of this, right? We've talked about the fact that if you are going to import fuel into this country, with the cost of what you would, the FX portion of it, if you put that into your pricing model, that is going to skyrocket the landing cost, fuel. So that is another aspect that has to be put in place with respect to what's going on here. So there's still quite a way to go. We expect resistance to this, and we'll see what happens when it comes to the harmonization of this bill. There's still, of course, the issue of the host communities and a lot of other things with respect to the PIB. But as of right now, this Senate portion, Section 317, restricting imports of refined fuel to oil refining capacity players, that is in contradiction with 205. We talked about an unregulated, or rather a free market for the downstream sector. We moved to tech. The central bank on Friday released guidelines. I've been releasing guidelines. These are more clearer guidelines on payment service banks, PSBs. And they've given more clarity as to the operation of PSBs, payment service banks in the country. They are restricting them. Well, they're restricted from receiving foreign exchange deposits. They're also restricted from granting loans, whether directly or indirectly, to consumers. There's a few caveats here and there. I think they're allowed to provide loans to their own employees, subject to board approval. But as far as end users are concerned, they're not allowed to engage in receiving foreign exchange deposits, not allowed to provide loans or grants to them. They also, this is essentially being guided by a risk management framework for the TSB. Look at what's happening in Kenya. Payment service banks there, at least mobile money operators, are allowed to give out loans, but we've seen some predatory lending practices. Rates have been skyrocketing in Kenya, so the Kenyan central bank has had to step in and try to regulate that space. So I think that's what the CBN is looking at here, not wanting things to get out of hand. They've also said that payment service banks have to partner, have to focus on rural areas as far as the financial inclusion targets are concerned for 2023. Remember, we didn't meet our financial inclusion targets for 2020. So they are mandating that the payment service, well, not really mandating, but they are encouraged to focus on rural areas and partner with their card service operators in order to try to get more access to the financially educated in rural areas, and also partner with agency operators so that getting agents in those areas as well to get more access to financial products. But so that's one thing. We can understand the arguments of the risk management framework, but there's also the arguments on the other side of competition. Remember last week we put up a chart on the mobile money revenues from MTN Ghana and how it exceeds the digital revenues of pretty much all the tier one banks in Nigeria. We also talked about what the moves that mobile money operators are making in other clients. So there's a risk management framework argument on one end, look at what's happening in Kenya. There's also the argument of the fear of competition for the banks in this country and what the threat that the PSBs through the mobile money operators pose to the banking sector. So that's the latest on that. Finally, infrastructure. The Minister of Transportation, Rotimi Amechi, has said that the frequent breakdowns that we've seen in the trains, particularly I think Abuja Kaduna, is due to a lack of spare parts. Says that a request has been made to the president, more funds are being put forward in order to get more spare parts provided for these trains to reduce breakdowns. But the answer there is probably to concession the operation of these trains to the private sector in order to be able to create more room for revenue to be brought in to be able to take care of spare parts. So that is now, according to analysts, as far as what the ticketing and what the trains are bringing in, it's barely enough to cover maintenance for those trains. So a lot more needs to be done there. But answer probably is concession and private sector players in that space. That's our African.
These are the costly trains that we're borrowing to fund. Oh dear. But I want to talk about the PSBs. I understand the CBN's rationale as regulators. They are doing what they ought to do. But it must be said, the whole thrust of financial inclusion goes beyond merely having more Nigerians have bank accounts. It's about exposure to the whole gamut of financial services, insurance, pensions, loans, what have you. So I'm a bit concerned that apart from sort of that high entry barrier, that these limitations are somewhat stringent, personally.
Very quickly, I would like to comment on the issues you raised about Section 317, subsection 8 of the proposed Petroleum Industry Bill, and how that section contradicts Section 205. Section 205 of the proposed bill, we're told in some of the reports in the papers today, talks about open competition, the creation of a level playing field. But the Section 317, subsection 8, takes that away almost immediately. And what is it saying? It's talking about backward integration policy in the downstream petroleum sector. And the interpretation of it in subsection 2 of that section is that only companies with local refining capacity will be allowed to play in the downstream sector and import petroleum products. Now, the issue here is one of great concern. It looks like an antitrust, provision that inverts the whole idea of antitrust, promotion of competition, whereby it limits the space for players within, that downstream sector. So if you don't have a local refinery, then of course you cannot play in the downstream sector, and you will be the only person or the only company that can import. Only this weekend, the U.S. president passed an executive order about antitrust provisions involving big tech companies in the United States. The EU, about 2 weeks ago, was talking about the same thing. So the gold standard is that, look, you open up the field, you create competition, you create a level playing field. And the main concern that has been expressed from the stories that I read this morning is that if that Section 317, subsection 8 of the Petroleum Industry Bill is allowed to pass, then you will be restricting the space for just a few persons. You will be, or companies. You'll be creating a monopoly, a duopoly, or whatever, within the downstream sector of the Nigerian petroleum sector. Well, that would not be in the best interest of Nigerians. That will not promote competition. That will also not be in the best interest of persons who over the years perhaps have invested, in that particular sector. I know that, yes, Nigeria wants to encourage local refining. We've been told that local refining, if you encourage it, it will create opportunities, it will bring down price, but it is important to remain committed to that idea about a level playing field, about open competition, about preventing monopoly, as we have seen in some other sectors of the economy. And I refer to the book written by Ezele Kwanyo, From Third World to the First World. And in one of those chapters, he talked about what he saw in Africa during a visit. And he mentioned a country, in this instance Nigeria, where a particular law was passed to serve a private interest. I don't want to mention any names because I don't want to embarrass any family in Nigeria, but it's there in the book, where a textile policy was passed because a particular minister was being favored so that he could promote his own business. He also talked about education in West Africa, how at that point when Singapore, which was at the same level with West African countries, was encouraging people to study science and engineering, West African countries were moving in another direction that he thought would not help the development process in West Africa. So these are the issues. We need to be forward-looking. And what is the future of oil? Okay, we're even talking about petroleum refineries. And there are persons who have been saying we should move from fossil fuels to renewable energy. The other day, the Minister of State for Petroleum, Chief Timothy Silva, said Nigeria has even discovered 260 trillion cubic meters of gas by accident, he said, not out of any creativity or intelligence on the part of the Nigerian authorities. And that this was where, in his view, where the future will lie. Okay, we're concentrating on local refineries. How about policies also in that PIB to encourage gas exploration, gas utilization, and to go ahead of that future in terms of the resource that is that has been suddenly, accidentally discovered by Nigeria.
Yeah, a missed opportunity there, Rufai.
I mean, for me, real quickly, let's see how they will implement it. But we have a precedent. Look at what is happening in sugar in the name of backward integration. See what it has cost. So, it's not that we just come here to say these things. We want our country to work. That's just all we want.
That's really all.
It's not about some people, really. But we can see what's happening in sugar. The sugar war that happened recently. And the clause still was backward integration.
But these lawmakers, do they even read the documents that are presented before them?
Dr. Abati. Dr. Abati.
Do they have legislative? Do they even read this
Dr.
documents?
Abati, let's move on. They don't. It's
well,
obvious.
Thank you, Rotus. On that grim note, we're moving on now to more business updates with Michael Wilson joining us from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson. Are you all right?
It's fine.
Good morning.
Even if the cup went to Rome.
Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Wilson is fine. The cup didn't come home.
I'm glad
Sweet
to hear
Caroline became Sad Caroline.
Oh.
Mr. Wilson, it's coming home. It's coming home.
Well, maybe next year.
It's coming home.
Maybe next year, you guys.
Okay, let's make it easy for
Maybe next year.
Okay, Michael Wilson, let's talk normal business. It's fine.
Okay, away from penalty, away from the football. Yeah, so China's central bank, a bit of easing really over the weekend. What they did was they cut their reserve requirement ratio by 0.5%. The RRR represents the amount of money that banks have to hold. It's the usual capital cushion. It happens in most countries as well. It's the country itself said, China said, it was demonstrating the fact it's got plenty of tools within the box to keep the economy going. A lot of people are actually looking at it and saying that, it is in effect a broad-based easing of the economy there, had a good effect on the markets. But basically everywhere else in the world, and China too, I'm suspecting, will be waiting for the most important thing, which starts tomorrow, which is the US reporting season. More of that later on. Asia Pacific, though. So therefore, the Japanese governments now put Tokyo under a new COVID state of emergency, stricter social distancing. That's in South Korea as well. Elsewhere in Southeast Asia, several countries, including Indonesia and Malaysia, are struggling now. So basically, however, Japan and China shares jumped today, shrugging off last week's losses. We'll see how that goes given the reporting season tomorrow. I think the overflow from the kind of indications that the US will be giving to the rest of the world will be quite considerable for equity markets around the rest of the world. We were talking on Friday about the crackdown on Didi in China. That, according to the markets, is threatening a lot of inward investment into China, capital flows particularly, as much as $45 trillion by 2030. The market view is that it's a sort of special view. It shows you how much the Chinese are prepared to risk or stroke spend to make sure that the reform actually continues. What's fairly clear, it's an unmistakable message from last week into this, noting the 100th anniversary of the China Communist Party, and that is being taken as a big reminder. Remember this: the commerce in China has said for the next 5 years, anybody wanting to invest overseas, measures for security review of foreign investment, they will have to satisfy those requirements. Chinese companies with over 1 million users of registered personal information will now be screened by Beijing's authorities should they wish to list offshore. A quick US recap for you. Now, we saw what happened on Friday. Over the weekend, the futures have added about 25 points to the Dow, about 0.8% higher for the S&P 500. What actually happened on Friday was quite interesting. They bought into this growth idea. So therefore, the kind of beaten down stocks, like Royal Caribbean, travel companies and so on, resorts, American Airlines, United Airlines, they both added more than 10% on Friday. That may well continue. But again, we're into the reporting season, so we're going to be talking big banks tomorrow to see how they've actually fared. G20 finance ministers, now this is back to a meeting in Italy over the weekend. Finance ministers backing that minimum 15% corporation tax. 132 countries have signed up to that right now. The G20 finance ministers, who represent 19 countries, the largest one, as well as the European Union, agreed, voiced their support to that. As far as individual countries taxing individual high-earning companies in their own countries, Janet Yellen said that progress would be slightly slow, and she's not expecting anything before about 2022. Richard Branson has beaten Bezos and Musk into space. He had his little trip yesterday, successfully reached the edge of space on the Virgin Galactic rocket plane. He flew over New Mexico, and he said it was the experience of a lifetime. He returned safely to Earth, as we know, or else we'd be doing that as a leading story, obviously, if he hadn't. And he said the whole experience was magical. So we got to wait for Jeff Bezos and SpaceX's Elon Musk to add their experiences to what it's like to touch on the edge of space in their own particular craft. Italy, as well as celebrating winning the Euros last night, it's also been asking that the pandemic fund, or at least one of its central bankers has been asking that the pandemic fund is not listed. We're looking at whether this new variant of COVID is affecting EU economic growth. I suspect it probably will. This chap is saying it's an emergency program that was brought in for the pandemic, and it's much too early to withdraw that kind of money away. By contrast, the US investment boom is set. The UK investment boom is set to really boom on the near horizon. Basically, low interest rates, high vaccine rates, and so on, and also lots of government help are going to help people start hiring. Huge hiring. Most companies UK companies are saying that they're almost back to where they were pre-pandemic. As far as trade's concerned, our UK Trade Secretary Liz Truss is in the United States meeting her equivalent there, Catherine Tai. They're talking about digital trade. They're talking about other trade. Remember, on the heels of the EU and the US agreeing this, the UK and the US also buried the hatchet really about the debate between Airbus and Boeing and subsidies there. And just to brief you, I'll go into more detail about this tomorrow, but as I said, most things now paused before the earnings season, which begins with JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and other major financial institutions starting tomorrow. So that's really when the week gets into some kind of focus and we can see where these big companies have actually been going as the pandemic, we hope, starts to dissipate over the rest of the world. But at the moment, still big question marks over that, obviously. Back to you.
Well, congratulations to Sir Richard Branson. There's always been more of a sincerity with his quest as opposed to sort of the cynicism that people accuse Jeff Bezos of. But I was watching his press conference after that successful voyage, and I was almost misty-eyed how emotional he was, sounding about how he felt seeing the beautiful planet we all occupy from that really unique perspective, and how he's going to devote the rest of his life towards protecting planet Earth. How do you feel about that overview effect, as they call it?
Well, when I was a student, I used to have one of those pictures of the Earth, which is taken by an orbiting satellite a long, long time ago. And I think that showed what a green and pleasant and blue planet it is within a black wasteland. And yes, I'm not, of course, climate change was not even a phrase when I was much younger, but now it is. And I feel it's absolutely right that entrepreneurs like Branson take this view, because it adds ammunition to those people who are looking to save the planet from ourselves. Now, how far they'll get with that, I do not know, but it's useful for people like Branson, who's taken a fair share of entrepreneurism over the years, starting with his little record store in London and all the rest of it, is actually now into space. It's the next big competitive ground, no question about that. And it won't just be these entrepreneurs. We've seen how China, Russia, NASA want to build their own space, want to continue building space stations and continuing these footsteps, first of all, to Mars. It's tremendously exciting. A lot of us, of course, won't live to see it.
All right, for me, very, very emotional moment, but I want to talk about DD2 Sheen. It is obvious now that American banks are going ahead to make a lot of money from IPOs from Chinese companies without doing due verification. I think FT was reporting that they've made over 460 million American banks in fees for IPOs and the likes. I mean, rather than Americans complaining and feeling slighted, why don't they go after their own banks that are sailing these Chinese IPOs through without doing verification? For instance, with DD2 Sheen, a lot of people have lost money that bought those shares.
Money finds its own gravity, I always feel, and you as much as you like, but unless that due diligence is supported on the other side, and this is what the investors are saying, they didn't get the information that they actually needed. Now, your question is the right one. So why bother investing in it in the first place? Well, you do because you've got a big pressure behind you. People saying, well. And I think a lot of Chinese companies want to come to market. Now, if they're being withheld from doing that, I draw your attention, if I may, to Ant Financial at the end of last year, similarly trying to do an IPO, and it was pulled by the authorities. What are these people supposed to do? Does China actually support the fact that what you do is, with a company, part of its finance is to offer shares to investors? Now, if you don't believe in that, then you're not part of capitalist society. If you do believe in that, then you've got to let the companies flourish. Now, as far as I can see, we've got with China is a bit like this. What they do is, instead of shouting out about it in the same way that the United States have done, what they do is they allow companies to develop, and then they take a look at them and say, okay, we like that, we don't like that. Seems perfectly fair to me, as far as the authorities are concerned, to do it like that, rather than stopping it to start with, which I think they did with Ant Financial. They may have learned the lessons from that. How would we know? We hope that's what's happened. But you're absolutely right. If you don't want to take part in IPOs from Chinese assets, then don't bother with them.
Well, Michael, we're running out of time, but I wanted you to comment on the executive order signed by President Biden. Is the U.S. now beginning to behave like China? With China, we talk about autocratic capitalism. With U.S., we talk about democratic capitalism. But now you have President Biden going after high tech, big tech, and rolling out a number of rules, which have even been opposed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Of what effect are these executive orders, considering the fact that executive orders are merely administrative handmaidens?
Yeah. As far as the legal States is concerned, you're asking the wrong person. I can say, though, generally speaking, that Biden, remember, is only in power until 2024. He may get elected again. He might stand. He might not stand. Maybe his deputy will come in. Maybe the Republicans will gather force. Who knows? It's a very, very short window. What he's doing is, as well as the infrastructure plan, everything that he seems to be doing, it may be like China as a parallel, but it's not projected towards China. What he's doing is he's playing for the home crowd. What he's doing is he's trying to increase his voter base within the United States, knowing that a tremendous amount of reconstruction has to take place there. And he's also betting that the voters do not like the fact that the Googles and the rest of it may well be based in the United States, but and consumers actually like them. This of course is the problem. But they as far as the majority is concerned, a good case to be made by the Democrats that they're not paying as much tax as they should, and they're also abusing their monopoly position. That's where Biden is right now. I think that what you'll see is a lot of fight back from the likes of Google. I mean, Google was interviewed over the weekend, wasn't it? Saying that, you know, we're now investing in artificial intelligence. It's important than fire as far as technology was concerned. I mean, that's the kind of change that you've got to deal with, but you also have to rein it in fairly within a commercial system, which is not allowing people to get magnificently super rich and just merely creating a gap between the super rich and the have-nots. And that's what's happening right now in the United States. So, Biden, I think, is possibly doing what politicians ought to do, which is seizing the opportunity and going for the rich people.
All right, thank you so much, Michael, and it was a joy listening to Space Oddity by David Bowie once again yesterday. Kudos to Richard Branson. Legend, I should say. For updates on COVID-19 pandemic, Adeso is here. Adeso Mara, good morning to you.
Well, COVID-19 variants of concern globally are causing rise in infections across the globe. Over 186 million infections have been recorded so far, at least 4 million deaths also recorded globally. When it comes to vaccination, over 3.4 billion doses have been administered worldwide. Again, China continues to lead in terms of reported numbers of doses. Health systems in some parts of the world spared in the early period of the pandemic are now buckling under the rates of infections and deaths, while others are imposing partial lockdowns, just as some are relaxing and planning to return to some semblance of normality. We are seeing lots of record infections on the continent of Africa. The most affected country, South Africa, just yesterday had to extend restriction measures for another 14 days. Here in Nigeria, 12 new cases of the coronavirus were recorded in the country in Nigeria. Akwa Ibom State in the south region of the country posted half of the new infections. A look at vaccination in Nigeria, 2.5 million eligible Nigerians have been vaccinated with first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine, while 1.4 million others have been vaccinated with a second dose. Meanwhile, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, the governor of Lagos State, yesterday said the state is experiencing what appears to be the start of a potential third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Governor Sanwo-Olu said the bed occupancy rates in isolation centers in the state has increased from 1% to 6% within the last 2 weeks, adding that the test positivity rate for the state has also gone from 1.1% at the end of June this year to its current 6.6%. He's mandating full compliance with all protective protocols, especially with religious houses and other public spaces. On vaccination, the governor says a mere 1% of the state population have been fully vaccinated, while it continues to explore all avenues possible to ramp up access. This is coming as the state, he says, is dealing with numbers of defaulting inbound travelers from high-risk countries and absconding individuals from isolation. A breakdown of the numbers the governor gave in his statement yesterday. Almost 10,000 passengers of interest who arrived through the Murtala Mohammed Airport between May and July this year alone could not be traced because they provided false contact information. And meanwhile, 15% of over 2,300 isolated returning persons have absconded from mandatory isolation. This is also coming a day the Oyo State government, also in the southwest part of the country, announced it has discovered the Delta variant of the COVID-19 in the state. Taiwo Adisa, Chief Press Secretary to the governor, disclosed this in a statement. He's advising inbound travelers to undergo the mandatory 7-day isolation in Oyo State. Away from Nigeria, Pfizer says it will meet with federal health officials in the U.S. to discuss need for a third booster shot of the coronavirus vaccines. It is coming days after the vaccine maker and its partner BioNTech announced plans to seek U.S. and European regulatory approval for a third dose of their jab. And this is amid spread of variants. And of course, data Pfizer itself said showed heightened risk of infection 6 months after initial inoculation. There's been response from the U.S. officials who say Americans don't need a booster right now, including from Dr. Fauci, the top U.S. infectious disease expert. He says the officials are not dismissing the possible future need for a booster shot, but that data is needed for any recommendation. Finally, let me tell you that Belgian medical researchers confirmed yesterday that an unvaccinated 90-year-old woman who died in March is the first documented fatality from 2 simultaneous COVID-19 variants. So what happened? On March 3rd this year, the woman who was unvaccinated was admitted into a hospital in Belgium. She treated injuries from falls and tested positive for COVID-19 that same day. Unfortunately, she died 5 days after. Now, after 2 PCR tests conducted, they found out that she had actually been infected with the Alpha variant and the Beta variant. Those are variants first identified in the UK, Kent to be precise, and South Africa.
Well, let's start with Pfizer BioNTech. We mentioned this last week.
Yes.
I think on Friday, when we made the point that Pfizer BioNTech is recommending that booster shots will be required. Not of the same variety, maybe a combination of booster shots. And there is a study by the Oxford University about 3 weeks ago, which indicated that going forward, since the coronavirus pandemic has become like the malaria flu, that maybe on an annual basis, people will have to take booster shots. But that for now, after 12 months, one report says 6 months, persons who have even already taken 2 jabs of either Pfizer or Moderna or any other vaccine will need to take a booster. And that is on the basis of that, that Pfizer BioNTech has applied to the Food and Drug Administration Agency, the FDA, in the United States. They're meeting today. Yes. We do not know exactly what the outcome of that will be. But what Pfizer BioNTech is saying is that, look, booster shots will be required after 12 months, in their own case, to further increase the antibody level in persons who have already taken the 2 jabs. But Anthony Fauci, the leading infectious diseases expert, has been quoted as saying, well, from the data that is available, he does not think that we have reached that point, but that it is a possibility. And if data is provided to prove it, then, of course, why not? What all of this says is that we keep knowing new things, about this, virus that is testing the capacity, not just of the global community, but also specifically of the scientific community. Yes. But we need to commend the effort of the scientists and big pharma, agencies that continue to try to find a solution to this global scourge. The Lagos State government did very well with the incident commander, the governor, coming forward yesterday to give an update and to warn Nigerians about the threat of a possible third wave. A third wave that we have witnessed already in 16 countries in Africa, in Libya, in Malawi, in Uganda, in South Africa, in other countries. 10 of them reporting the emergence of the Delta variant. Nigeria joined that list as the 11th country just a few days ago. And Lagos, as the commercial center of Nigeria, as the epicenter of the coronavirus in Nigeria, as the governor himself said in paragraph 3 of that statement. Precautions need to be taken. But the bulk of the governor's statement is about people observing the protocols. 2, government enforcing the law. There's a law in place. And it was very clear in that statement about persons who come into Lagos and who run away, how they will be tracked down, and whatever law, whatever document makes it possible for them to come into Lagos will be revoked. And also individuals will be tried under the health regulation laws of Lagos. Yes. But I think what is more important is how to check the hypocrisy, the prevalent hypocrisy, not just in Nigeria but globally, about responses to COVID-19. Wimbledon, all the courts were filled to capacity. Wembley Stadium had over 60,000 people yesterday. In Serbia, they are having what they call Exit Festival. Everybody is there. Every weekend, people are jollofing and partying and milicking all over Lagos. Can we see a more proactive step to check that?
Yes, the governor did say that people will be jailed under the Lagos State coronavirus law, which is music to my ears. I mean, what manner of sociopath must you be, knowing exactly what this virus is and the devastating effect it has, then you go and you lie when giving your contact details. Those people deserve to be jailed, quite frankly. But to buttress what Dr. Abati said, I don't understand the constant focus on places of worship in this context. Yes, we saw what happened in India with that festival that I keep going on about, that Kumbh Mela festival that should never have happened. Yeah. But the governor made a point to say, because Salah is just around the corner, you know, religious activity, people need to be cautious. What about all the social activity, sporting activity? Why is the focus on religious activity? Political activities as well. Exactly. So it gets a bit... People need to stop the hypocrisy, just like you said. Why is it the focus always on religious activity? And social events, they are back. A lot of events have started again. Yes. The hotels are packed to the brim now for social events. There's a particular hall that takes about 6,000 people. So the hotels, the shortlet? No, not the shortlet, Dr. Abati. I don't want to measure the popular hotel, the one that has 6,000 capacity. They have events there. The short-time hotels, they became popular recently. But we must also add that the governor went ahead to commend the religious houses that have been closed for more than 16 months now, over a year. Most of them had remained closed or have had to cut down on services and events. And well, do they have a choice? There was such a focus on them. Yes, and most of them are trying to reopen, and so he's sounding one. I also suppose it's because most of these religious houses are enclosed spaces, and with enclosed spaces, we know what happens with the virus, its ability to build up. So he's saying they have to maintain their 50% capacity for all enclosed spaces. It's a tough time. Everybody has to fall in line, unfortunately. Yeah, everybody, across the board. Let's just all be careful, and please wear your mask again. The mask mandate is back, please. Let's enforce those things, just for our own good.